All-American Triple Loop is the biggest flop I've seen from a new roller coaster opening in a long time. Usually when a park debuts a brand new ride, it's met with some positivity. That's not necessarily saying it's perfect or that it's everyone's favorite, but they tend to be a well-received, overall enjoyable ride experience. And that is far from what All-American Triple Loop is. And the worst part about it is, this should have been great. There is so much potential with this ride, but it just completely misses the mark. When I went out to Indiana Beach to experience it, I heard significantly more negative responses than positive. The most common thing I heard from people was that they would never ride it again, or even go as far as saying it was the worst coaster they'd ever ridden. And that is mind-blowing. Like, how does that even happen? Why is All-American Triple Loop that bad? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss the ride experience, tell you everything you need to know about it, and also give you some tips. So if you're going to Indiana Beach and you plan on experiencing it, there are some things you can do to make your ride experience less painful. Now, the first important note for the background of this coaster. It isn't technically new. It's actually a 1984 built attraction opening 40 years later. And this is the 5th location it is operated in. It started off on the German fair circuit as dryer looping, which is German for triple loop. It then was sent to Malaysia, where it operated for 2 years, made its way up to Flamingo Land in the UK, where it operated for 5 years. There it was called Magnum Force, and then it had its longest run down in Mexico City at La Feria, where it operated for 12 years. It unfortunately was there where in 2019 the ride suffered a severe accident. Part of the train derailed, leading to the death of multiple individuals. It caused the whole park to shut down. It's now open under a completely different name. They removed most of the attractions, including this one. It was known there as Chimera. Indiana Beach must have gotten that ride for a really good price because they acquired the ride from Mexico, shipped it up here, gave it a nice fresh coat of paint, and bought some brand new trains from it. These trains came from the recently closed Mindbender roller coaster at the West Edmonton Mall at a park called Galaxyland. That's another Schwarzkopf looping coaster with a very similar layout. Actually, I'd say that All-American Triple Loop is more or less the same thing, just more compact. Like, we're dealing with a height of 108 feet versus Mindbender was 145 feet tall. 60 miles per hour, this is 53. So they really just Frankensteined this coaster together, and I think in doing that, some errors took place. The first likely issue, the track. Not only was Chimera in a bad accident, but prior to that, the ride was not in great shape. The coaster operated without the use of its trim brakes, and so it ran too fast. So that's a lot more stress being put on the track and supports. Those who rode both said Chimera was just as rough as All-American Triple Loop, but you just didn't feel it as much because of the restraint setup. Because of the derailment, we're pretty sure that some of the track got physically damaged, so that also meant that new pieces had to be completely remanufactured to match with the pre-existing track. The problem is we don't know which sections got redone, because not all of the ride is really rough. It's primarily when the ride is turning to the right, which unfortunately for All-American Triple Loop is actually most of the roller coaster. But if you're going in a straight line, it's fine. Like, the loops are great. I've done several Schwarzkopf looping coasters that just have these amazing circular loops, and these are pretty on par. So I guess it lives up to the name that the best part of this ride is the triple loop. It just sucks that you have to deal with everything else to get to that point. Now, the other error that could have taken place, matching these trains with this ride. Even though they're rides from the same manufacturer, it's possible that there could have been a minute tolerance difference that makes it so that the trains aren't quite flush with the track. I'm leaning towards this option not being the case because I noticed when the ride was traveling in a straight line, the vehicle wasn't vibrating. There was no rattle, it felt completely smooth. So that leads me to believe that the roughest parts are from track manufacturing errors, where the profiling is off just enough to send your head from side to side. The most notable moments from this are the first drop and the transitions in and out of the vertical loops. And seeing as those specific moments were not where the original accident took place on Chimera, I think that's just from the original track. Again, the ride was not in a great condition. And I know for a fact that the people from Indiana Beach who bought this ride did not experience it until it opened here at Indiana Beach. I mean, how could they? It didn't operate after the accident. So they probably didn't fully realize what they were getting themselves into. Because on paper, Schwarzkopf coasters are awesome and they're big crowd pleasers. A ride like Olympia Looping is literally torn down and rebuilt multiple times a year as it travels across Europe, and that thing is glass smooth and very, very popular, even though the restraints suck. And having never ridden Chimera, I went into All-American Triple Loop assuming that it was going to feel like Olympia Looping or Mindbender, where it's a smooth ride experience just with bad trains. And I'm sure they got a good rate for buying used trains for a roller coaster that was set to be demolished. But it still makes me sad that they couldn't have modified them in some sort of way to make it more comfortable for riders, because we are dealing with 3 different sets of restraints. It is overkill. You first have a seatbelt, you then have a lap bar, and then you have these shoulder harnesses. And those are the ones that really need to go. There is absolutely no reason for them to be here. The way it's set up is once you're in your seat, a ride operator comes down and manually pushes this accordion shoulder harness down onto you, locking it in place. So you feel like firmly in there, like you're not going anywhere. And in order to have the most optimum ride experience, you have to do something counterintuitive. You have to make sure that that shoulder harness is as tight on your body as possible. It's because this ride is so rough that if there's any gap at all, you will get tossed around and it will hurt like crap. But even that won't save it, because then as it's going around the track, if you're not properly bracing yourself, your head could then slam into the shoulder harnesses. So you have to ride triple loop as defensively as possible. Tense up your body. And the problem is, most people don't know to do that. The average guest that walks into Indiana Beach isn't a coaster enthusiast. They didn't do any prior research before riding. And so the general response from even the normal everyday guest was negative. People were in pain. They were saying that was not comfortable. And so it makes me wonder how long this ride is even going to last in this current condition. Something's got to change, whether it be the restraints or the track profiling, or ideally both. I don't expect that to happen during the summer season, but maybe during the off season, the park will make the right decision and try to fix this thing, because I'm worried this ride is legitimately going to hurt someone. These kinks in the track are no joke. You get slammed laterally in such an aggressive way. It could hit your neck, it could cause pain to your shoulders, and you'll find yourself wanting the ride to be over sooner than later, which is just not how a roller coaster should be. Every time you ride something that's a short ride, you're usually like, dang, I was sad when it ended. Here, you hit the brake run and you're like, thank goodness. Now, the last tip that I'll give is that depending on where you sit, your experience might be worse. Specifically, you have to sit in the front of a car. So that could be row 1, row 3, or row 5. For whatever reason, the backs of each car, aka rows 2, 4, and 6, are significantly less comfortable. The issue is, it's hard to pick your seat because you can't queue for a specific row. It's just one single file line that funnels straight onto the train. So either you get lucky and you're the first one to pick a seat and you can go to the front or the second to back or whatever's available, or you're some of the last riders to board the train and you just have to pick whatever's left. And then the actual process for checking those restraints is just very lengthy. Dispatches on All-American Triple Loop take some time, and it only operates with one train. And that's probably for a good thing, because at one point, after it had just been raining for a bit and the drive tires were wet, the train was starting up the lift hill, lost traction, and then rolled back into the station, hitting the brakes. Like, that's not good at all. What if there was another train on the tracks? Rides like Olympia Looping are designed to operate with multiple trains. I'm wondering why this coaster doesn't have anti-rollbacks. Those are literally to prevent something like that from happening. So it's just weird. So yeah, if you're going to Indiana Beach and it's been raining, don't expect this coaster to be operating. So to just wrap things up, I rode All-American Triple Loop 3 times, which was 2 more times than most people I was with. Personally, I found the second and back row to be the most comfortable, even more comfortable than the front row, believe it or not. And the worst row was the one time that I sat in the second row of a car. The kinks just hit you way worse, particularly on the first drop. That's really bad. And then before the first loop, that's probably the worst part. But there's also a really bad one after the last loop. But frankly, even when I was sitting in the right row, tensing up, bracing myself for those transitions, it still was not as good as it should have been. Schwarzkopf coasters are supposed to be awesome. I love Colossus the Fire Dragon at Lagoon, Shockwave, Six Flags Over Texas, even Mindbender at Galaxyland, which again has a very similar layout and literally operated with these trains, was nowhere near as bad. It was not rough like All-American Triple Loop is. So for that reason, I think Indiana Beach absolutely has to do some work to fix this thing up, and if they can't, I believe they're going to try and sell it after a couple of years. And frankly, I don't know who will buy it again, because even though it looks nice and is visually impressive, it is far from a great ride. So for All-American Triple Loop's final score, I'm giving it a 2.5 out of 10. Now, some of you guys might be surprised at this. You might be saying, Taylor, I thought you'd give it a 1. What happened? Well, again, the loops are actually good. And in theory, the layout should be good as well. But there's just too many problems with this roller coaster that unless Indiana Beach fixes them up, it is not an experience you should seek out. I don't blame you for wanting to try it once while you're at the park, but the odds are strong that you're not going to want to do it again. And that just makes me sad, because again, I was really excited for this ride. I had faith that Indiana Beach would be able to fix this thing up. And at the moment, it seems like the best thing they did with it was give it a nice, pretty color scheme. So at least it looks nice. But let me know down in the comments below if you've experienced All-American Triple Loop at Indiana Beach, if you had a similar experience to the one that we had. If you disagree with any things that I mentioned, please let me know down below. And of course, stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.